Wait.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you might be. And on behalf of myself, Lynn Julius, and my technical assistant, Lawrence here, welcome to another Harif lecture. I don't call it lockdown lecture anymore. Harif, for those who don't know, is a small band of volunteers, and we aim to raise awareness of the history and culture of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. Please do check out our website, www.harif.org, to get updates and login details for our online events, and also our sister website, which is Point of No Return, which keeps you up to date with the news. And you can access that just by clicking on news on the Harif website. This session is being recorded. It's being live streamed on Facebook, and we hope to have the video up very shortly. If you have any questions or observations, please do type them in the chat at the bottom of your screen. And I think that's all for housekeeping. So on to our event, which I'm very, very excited about. We have with us Catherine Perez-Shakdam, and a few Jews have a background more extraordinary than Catherine. Her family is descended from Sephardim who actually stayed in Spain. And from there, they moved to Tunisia and to France, and she moved to England, and then she moved to Yemen with her husband. And as a journalist and a political analyst, she became a specialist in Yemen and Iran, to the extent that she was soon hobnobbing, I'd say, with the top echelons of the Iranian regime. And in 2017, Catherine was the only Western media personality to have been granted a private audience with Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei and an interview with Ibrahim Raisi, who's now the president. So today she's living in the UK, and she's reclaimed her identity as a Jew and a Zionist. And I'm hoping to hear from Catherine about her remarkable story. And also, I hope she will offer her unique insights into the current political situation in Iran. So welcome, Catherine, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Lynn. You've been very kind with your introduction, I have to say.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning in Spain. I mean, you have Spanish roots. I thought all the Jews left in 1492.
No.
But your family stayed behind. I mean, how come?
No, they actually left in the 1930s. So, I mean, they had to, because my grandfather had the great idea of not only being, he was a Zionist Jew, but also a communist. So let's just say that he didn't sit very well with the Franco regime. So they had to run away. A bounty was actually set on his head. So the idea initially was to actually go to Israel and relocate there. But they stopped along the way. They stopped in Tunisia. And within weeks of their arrival in Tunisia, actually, Tunisia was invaded by Nazi Germany.
Right.
And so that meant they were literally locked. They could not go anywhere. And alongside many, many Jews at the time, they were forced into a camp. It wasn't a death camp. It was a concentration camp, a labor camp. There was about 3, I believe, in Tunisia. They were in the main one, which was in the north of the country, not too far from the sea. And we lost family members there. So it wasn't, it's been rather traumatic for my family. My father was born after that. So he never experienced any of it, but I think the trauma of it kind of carried. And they decided to stay on because my grandmother didn't feel like she lost a son. And she didn't feel like she wanted to, since her son was buried in Tunisia, she wanted to stay. right where she was, and leave her days there. So they never actually made it to Israel, which was a bit of a blow to my grandfather because that was his dream. So that didn't happen. And on the other side of my family, we from France. And we've
That's
been
your
in
mother's
France.
side. Yeah.
That's my mother's side, yes, for
Yeah.
generation and generation.
Right.
And my grandparents managed to, on my mother's side, managed to survive the war by actually, espousing a new identity and essentially claiming to be Christians. And my grandfather decided to join the resistance, like many other Jews. And I think it's been a great shame that a lot of the time when we spoke of the French resistance, people tend to forget that 80% of the members of the French resistance were actually Jews. And that they definitely fought back and did so very bravely.
Right. And can I take you back to Spain? Because it's still a mystery to me how your family would have survived until the 1930s. I mean, and how did they keep their Jewish identity?
Well, they were not, by the way, they were not alone. I mean, there were quite a few families that did what my grandparents did, and their forefathers before that, which was, first of all, they had the advantage of being in the countryside. So they were not, I mean, it was a small community, so people tend to be quite friendly with one another. They also didn't make any wave in the sense that their Judaism was not out in the open. It was kept behind closed doors. They did not advertise it. People knew, but it wasn't spoken about. So I think there was some kind of an entente of some sort. People, I think in the countryside kind of need each other for many great reasons. And so it wasn't something that they were never in danger. I mean, from what I was told, I wasn't told too much, to be quite honest with you, because it's one thing that my dad and never really talked about. But they managed to make it through, and while keeping to the tradition, without being diluted. So I think they made it, but quite a few people have done so. In Yemen, it's happening too, where a lot of people have gone underground and actually retain their Jewish identity, but are not advertising it. Right. And so because no one speak about it, people think that they're not there. But they are.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We'll come back to Yemen in a minute. So we were in Tunisia in 1942, and as you said, thousands of Jews were marched off to forced labor camps. And you said you lost a member of your family in one of those camps. And what were the circumstances?
So my grandmother's son at the time, Michael, who was 2 years old, died from, I think he had tuberculosis, and he contracted, I think, typhoid or something else. I mean, he was very, very ill, so passed away. And also my grandfather's brother got killed. He got shot.
He got shot. Yeah.
He got shot for not complying.
And did you manage to find a memorial to him, or
I did.
You did?
I did. It was quite difficult. I actually didn't, because I was doing a search. And I did not expect, to find anything at all. And I found a picture with, his name and, his birth date and the date of his death. In Tunisia somewhere, there was a picture. So it kind of hit me. It was a very, very strange feeling. It kind of made it real. Yeah. It kind of brought it home for me. It was, I'm not sure I have processed it yet. Haven't digested it. Yeah. I'm glad I did it, because I feel that now there's proof, not that I needed it. But
it's on a monument.
Yes, it's yeah. I think it's one of the synagogue in Tunis where there's a plaque, and there's a few names, and one of the names is his. So I don't know how he got there, whether it's something that, for example, my grandfather did to honor his brother. I don't know. But I think it's I'm glad that it's there, because it's a reminder that people were there, people did die for very unfair and unjust reasons, and that we should remember them and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is important to remind people that the Holocaust, World War II, did affect Jews in North Africa and in the Middle East. It's often forgotten.
I think it's not just forgotten. I think it's very purposely erased from people's memory. And I think it's very easy to kind of decide to kind of geographically confine the Holocaust to just, Eastern Europe, and said that it just happened there, as opposed to kind of, I would say, a global effort to annihilate the Jews, because it's easier for people to then rationalize saying it was Nazi Germany. I beg to differ. I think that many countries were maybe not as guilty because they did not initiate, but France, for example, volunteered its Jews, and it's never talked about, not really. They had a bit of a mea culpa about 10 or 20 years ago, saying, we apologize. I think that an apology somewhat make people believe that they were forced to, like others. I beg to differ. They literally volunteered.
Yeah.
Germany did not ask for anything.
No.
But the French government at the time, Vichy, decided to say, well, you didn't ask for it, but, let's do it anyway. And because it hasn't been spoken about it, because it hasn't been addressed, I feel that what we see today in terms of the rise in anti-Semitism is quite understandable to me, because we haven't addressed the elephant in the room, in that we haven't exercised the demon that France had to battle for decades. Is that anti-Semitism is rife, it's profound, it's taught, and because we don't talk about it, we don't talk about the 1930s and 1940s, people assume that it was just Germany, that it just happened there, and that everything else was kind of, there's no need to talk about it and upset people. And it's not that I wish to upset people, but I think that in order to make sure that history is not repeated, we need to learn from what happened, and actually be honest about things.
Yeah, and we know that the French police collaborated with the Nazis, actually rounded up Jews, and that sort of thing. And the Vichy rules in North Africa were often more stringent than what was applied in Vichy France itself.
Exactly. And again, Berlin at the time did not, impose on France, but the French decided that they were going to do it anyway.
Yeah, right. So we're now in Tunisia. Your grandparents leave Tunisia to go to France, is that right?
No. So my grandparents stayed in Tunisia, but obviously Tunisia was French at the time, and so that meant that once you reach, when you come of age, you turn 18, you have to go to university in Paris if you want to get a proper education. And so that's what my father did.
Right.
He went to France and he met my mother, and then I happened.
And then you happened.
I happened.
So you spent the first 17 years of your life in France?
Yes, I did. Right?
Yeah, and you had a sort of unremarkable childhood.
Very normal. Very, very French, so very secular. I had a good childhood. I can't complain. It was, looking back now, I realized that France was quite a strange place at the time. For Jews, it's been, but I didn't know any better. So, for me, it was normal. But you kind of learn to live with the kind of blatant anti-Semitism. It was a thing. We were used to it, and I didn't think it was a big deal. I was just used to it.
Right.
And then, I came to the UK and I realized that things were slightly different.
Slightly different, right. So you came to study in London. Yes. And you met your future husband.
I did. My future ex-husband.
Your future ex-husband. Tell us about that.
Look, well, when I met him, I was obviously quite young. Also had quite a lot of trauma because I lost my mom when I was 11. So and then went to boarding school. So I was kind of looking for, my own little family. There was many issues, but I'm not going to bore you with them.
No.
But I think I was quite vulnerable at the time, and I was just looking for myself. I was 17, and you're 17, you think you know everything, but you don't know much. I certainly had no idea, who I was really. I had no real idea of my own because, I was too young to have had any kind of experience. And so, when I met him, he came across as someone very, strong on family values, someone who definitely knew who he was, had very clear ideas about, politics and religion and everything else. And I think it was very seductive to me because I thought that, here I am and I don't know. I don't know what I want. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know who I am. And there's this person who, seems to have it all figured out. And I just, felt safe. And I thought that was a good idea. And yeah, it wasn't so much of a good idea, but definitely was an education.
So you moved.
Yeah, so I just, you know, look, I was raised in such a way that, you know, when you start kind of dating someone, you know, you marry them. I mean, you do it in the view of, you know, that relationship going somewhere, and usually that somewhere is, you know, is marriage. So I did this because I didn't know any better. And I thought that was it. You know, I would be safe and be happy forever and ever. And I thought at the time, because, you know, he was obviously, you know, Muslim from Yemen. And again, because I came from a very secular background, and my understanding of Islam at the time, again, was very French, and in France back then anyway. Most Muslims are quite secular. And so there was no real discussion around, you know, what radicalism meant or what even being a Muslim meant. You know, for me, that was, you know, kind of Christian during Christmas, you know, having the turkey but not really going to church anyway. So my understanding of Islam was that it was just a religion that really didn't mean anything in terms of, you know, what they do every day. And that I didn't see why it should, you know, be a problem. I was wrong again.
So you were wrong. You moved to Yemen.
I was extremely naive and ignorant at the time, extremely. And also I was so much of an optimist that, you know, I thought that love conquers all. And I thought that people were being very hypocritical, and, you know, that all the people who told me that it was a bad idea were just, you know, wrong. I just thought that I would prove you wrong, that, you know, things, you know, things can change, and, you know, people can live together and be different, and it would be fine. And, you know, you're just projecting your own insecurities onto me, all that. And they were right. Yeah. But again, it was my experience. It doesn't mean that it's always like this. It's, you know, it was just, you know, with me, it didn't work out.
It didn't work out. And no. So you were catapulted into his family, presumably.
Yes, I was. Yeah. Yes, I was. And that meant that obviously you have to comply, you know, with the tradition, their way of life, their belief system. And it's not so much that you have to believe in them. You just have to comply and give the appearance of, as far as the neighbors are concerned. You know, you have to kind of erase your own identity and adopt that of your husband, essentially. And it's not like they ask for your permission to do so, it just happens. And that's when the fun began, because at the beginning, everybody was extremely welcoming, you know, telling me, I mean, I think that the best story that they used to tell me was that, you know, their prophet married a Jewish woman. And so therefore, yeah, there was no problem. Everybody, you know, was perfectly happy with his, you know, with their son's decision, and that it was fine. I quickly learned that, at least for them anyway, I don't like to brush people under the same color. But for them, it became a problem very, very quickly. Where again, I think for about 6 months, everything was fine. I was welcomed, and it was very nice to me. And then things started to kind of turn a bit sour, where I was constantly reminded that it was different, that, you know, I had to earn, it's not so much the affection, but the acceptance. And that in order to do so, you know, I had to erase my identity. But the problem is, I think they wanted me to cancel out my DNA, which I can't do. But yeah, so it was a brutal 10 years, let's put it that way. It wasn't fun.
Right. And you mentioned that you came across Yemenis who were actually of Jewish origin. Yeah. It was quite interesting. Yeah. And did they actually reveal that to you, or did you find out?
There was a funny encounter, because, you know, you have what they call the old city of Sana'a, which there's an old Jewish quarter there, where traditionally Jews were selling silver. So they were into, you know, they have those very intricate, you know, objects.
Filigree, yeah.
And so you had the whole, you know, row of bill shops in the souk, you know. And I was walking with a friend of mine one day, and I got into a shop, and I was quite surprised, because it was hidden, but I saw a menorah, and I was thinking, that's a bit strange, you know, because I was am I seeing things? But it was hidden behind things. And then, you know, the shopkeeper saw me look at it, and I was looking at him, and I was like, is that is that what I think it is? And then, you know, we started talking a little bit, and then, you know, he told me like, you know, there's a lot of Yemeni who are actually Jews, and, you know, he told me a bit of the history, and he didn't say anything, but I kind of assumed that he was one of them. It was kind of, you know, unsaid. But I mean, I figured that if there was a menorah in a shop, there must be something there. And there are quite a few. I mean, especially in North Yemen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I came across a few. But interestingly enough, in Yemen, the houses and even the synagogues had to be a lot lower than every other houses, to kind of impress on people the hierarchy of things.
Right.
Which I always found very upsetting, because sometimes you walk in Sana'a and then you see houses that are, completely, I mean, it's almost like they're dropped, and the doors are very tiny, and you're thinking like, why would you build a house like this where you have to literally like kind of, hunch to kind of get in? And and people were telling me, well, actually those are, the former Jewish quarter.
Right.
And I always find it very upsetting, thinking like, why do that? But it's a reminder.
A reminder, yeah. And the dhimmi status lasted until well into the 20th century, didn't it?
In Yemen, I think it's still it's still there.
Still there. But no more Jews.
I think you have literally about 3 left. I mean, that we know of. In the north, you have a few communities in the south, in Aden.
Yeah.
But again, most of them have, on paper at least, converted to Islam, but they're keeping the tradition alive behind closed doors, which is it's sad. One of them actually reached out to me on Twitter a few months ago, telling me that they wanted their stories to be kept alive, and that one day they hope to kind of to be able to tell the world what they had, what they went through. But it's sad. It's sad.
Fascinating. So is that when your career as a journalist actually took off, when you were living in Yemen?
Yeah. I was quite angry, because again, when you kind of systematically every day being attacked for being you, basically, for breathing, essentially, everything. I mean, every time I used to turn on the news, if anything was related to Israel, it was my fault somehow. So it was always you guys, you this, you that, and you get used to it. But it just makes you extremely angry. So I had a lot of anger that I needed to kind of channel. And so I started writing. And I was very interested in, I mean, at the time, we were talking about Saudi Arabia and, the invasion of Iraq, and the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime. And so I had things to say on this, and a lot of my views were actually misconstrued, because I was quite critical of military interventionism. Not that I was, advocating for Saddam Hussein to stay on, but my criticism was more directed to the fact that we didn't have any plan for what happened, what happens the day after, and that unfortunately civilians, paid the price for that lack of strategy. So that's the kind of criticism that I was offering to whoever was reading me at the time. And also I was talking about Saudi Arabia's, human rights violation at the time, and the fact that they're, back then anyway, they were kind of in bed with, radicals. And that I had an issue with that, and I was just, calling for accountability, which accountability has happened since. So, wonderful. But those were the kind of things that I was talking about back then. And that caught the attention of the Iranians, because they have a very kind of black and white view of the world. It's very binary. And so they assume that if you're critical of Saudi Arabia and the US, then you must be on the Islamic Republic side, or that at least you could be brought, to be on their side. And I think that the fact that they perceive me as a convert, because obviously they assume automatically that if you live in the Middle East and you marry to a Muslim man, then you must have converted, and that you must believe, which wasn't the case. But for the sake of appearances, you have to wear a headscarf when you're in Yemen anyway. So people just made assumptions, never corrected them, because my life was a lot safer and easier by doing so. And so they just they built on those assumptions and decided that I was a friendly. And when they extended a hand saying, would you like to, to make a few comments on TV? Would you like to write this? Would you like to write that? I saw an opportunity. I mean, I could have said no, and that would have been the end of it. But at the same time, again, like I said, I was quite angry. And I realized by then that I had made a terrible mistake when it came to my marriage. I didn't really have a way out of it at the time because I was in Yemen and I had my children, and I didn't want to, I knew that if I was to leave, that would mean leaving my kids behind. That was never going to happen. And so I had to find a way to survive because I was drowning. And so I decided to channel all my anger. And just, I think to some extent, I wanted to seek revenge, and do what they did not expect me to do. And so I thought, well, here's a lifeline for me, because maybe I could get close to the Islamic Republic, because by this time I had realized that a lot of the, the radicalism, the anti-Semitism, the violence in the Middle East, was coming out from, was being promoted by the Islamic Republic, and that we were trying to put out all those fires here and there, but not actually addressing, I would say not the elephant, but the dragon in the room. And I thought, well, maybe at the time I didn't expect that I would meet those people, that I would meet with, high-ranking members of the regime. But I thought that maybe if I could get close enough to understand the ideology, to understand how it works, maybe that could then relay that experience and find a way to make it better, or at least, to, since I'm here, to give some sense of direction and purpose to my life, rather than just, disappear under anti-Semitism and, a rejection of everything that I was. I was just looking for a way to survive, this experience. And then eventually we moved out of Yemen, came back to the UK, and then I got a divorce, and that was the end of that chapter. But I carried on with the Islamic Republic because I was thinking, well, I'm definitely going somewhere. And I just wanted to see how far I could get. And I got pretty far, at least far enough, while keeping my head. So, yeah.
Okay, so we now come to the momentous events of February 2017. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think we've got a few pictures to show as well. So tell us what happened exactly. Did you attend a conference, or were you invited?
I did. So every 4 years, the Islamic Republic has this conference on Palestine that it hosts. And it's basically what I call the who's who of terrorism. So, everyone from, Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthis, to the Dawa party in Iraq, everyone gathered in Tehran, and for about a week, discussed the Palestinian issue. And usually it's not so much the Palestinian issue, it's rather, what they call the Zionist problem. And they look for solutions to that problem. And, they decided to invite me in 2017. So I took part, and it was definitely, I would say, one of the most defining moments of my life. And that it was an out-of-body experience. It was something else. I mean, the people who were there, the head of Hamas was there. Like I said, the who's who of terrorism. I think that you had quite a few people on quite a few lists who attended that conference, and including Ayatollah Khamenei, of course. He opened the ceremony, and during that visit in Tehran, I was actually extended an invitation to meet with him. And the gentleman that you see here on the picture has now passed away, but his Nader Talebzadeh, who's one of the architects of the regime's propaganda machine. And he's the one who actually opened all the doors for me.
Right. And can you tell us what he did exactly, Talebzadeh, and I mean, what impact he had, say, on the West that we don't actually realize?
Tremendous. First of all, yeah. Nader was educated in America, so he's a product of, I would say, an elite university. I mean, he was the American dream on paper. But in 1979, he decided, he was from a very kind of pro-Shah family, but decided in 1979 to join Khomeini at the time. And when he went back, he very quickly positioned himself as the chief propagandist of the regime and started building the regime media arm. So he set up Tehran Times at the time. He's the one who architected Press TV. He's responsible for all the various press agencies and the way that things are being, architected, the kind of narrative, the language, how to relay the Islamic ideology to the West, who to approach, how to infiltrate academia, and how to also find ways to make their message echo that of the West. So they try to basically, if there's a cause they feel that certain people are espousing that is close enough to the kind of ideology that they're trying to sell, they will try to kind of piggyback on those people and try to bring them slowly to their views. And a lot of the time they do so without people even knowing about it. So they kind of approach you covertly and try to befriend you, bring you along those conferences or ask you to be writing for this or that media. And people a lot of the time don't even realize that they are slowly being brought into a network and circles that are actually not very friendly to the West, but pretend to want to open up discussions and build bridges. They love those words, to build bridges.
How did it feel to have his arm around you?
It wasn't the best, but again, I was very determined at the time, and I knew that also. Look, if I traveled to Iran, traveled to Iraq, I was surrounded by people who I knew. I mean, the second that they would find out about me, I would be gone. There was no question. So I knew that I had to play that game, and I had to be, to say the right things, to do the right things. And to play stupid most of the time. Playing stupid has helped me a lot. So I used to just, open my eyes really, really wide and, pretend to not know about history, pretend to, please explain it to me. Because this way, they don't feel so threatened. Also, I'm a woman, so they assumed I was stupid anyway, and that I could be manipulated and I would be a tool. So yeah, I used that. Again, I was angry, so I was quite determined that I would make them pay. Not in it's not in an aggressive way, but I wanted to expose them and tell the world who they are.
Right, and how come you met Ayatollah Khamenei? You said opened the conference, so obviously.
Yeah, he opened that conference. So I mean, I wish I was in the room, but with a few hundred other people. So there was nothing special about this. But on the side of the conference, there was quite a few meetings, and of course, our SGC was involved.
Right.
And because they always scope for new people, and they try to identify, who could we use, who could we send out, to be our mouthpiece, in America and in France and in the UK. And for whatever reason, they thought that, I was not a bad writer, that I could, put a few words together on TV, and that maybe they could use me. And so, I was granted, I would say, a few audiences with them, and I think I passed the test, whatever that was. And, one day they very bluntly asked me, like, if you could ask for anything, what would you ask while you're here? Mm-hmm. So obviously I looked at them, and I mean, it was half a joke, and I was half hoping that might happen. I told them, well, obviously I would like to, to meet with Ayatollah Khamenei, because I mean, I'm here, why not? And they smiled and they said, well, we'll let you know, but if it does happen, just be ready. When we call you, like, we'll give you half an hour to be ready in the lobby, and we'll come and pick you up. I didn't think that it would happen. I thought that those people were not lying to me, but kind of trying to make me happy. But that sometimes Iranians do this, but they promise you the moon. Not saying that they don't need it at the time, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was one of those kind of polite, conversation, and it did happen. So they did make it happen. But it was kind of a shock, because I did not to this day, actually, I'm not quite sure what is it that he wanted with me. And I guess that we'll never find out, because I kind of I broke ties with the regime after that, because I just didn't feel safe, and I thought that it was getting a bit too people were starting to ask questions, right. And so I didn't want to be around for when those questions would be answered. Yeah,
obviously. But did he say anything that shocked you particularly? That
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, look, all the conversation that I had with the regime always went back to Israel, always went back to the annihilation of the Jewish people. And I'm not using the word lightly. We're not talking about, they want the Jews to leave Israel, or that they want, Israel to come to some, agreement with the Palestinians on their terms. We're talking annihilation, as in they don't want any more Jews at all. And this is part of their ideology. The problem is they're using Islam to kind of justify that narrative. And it's very difficult for people sometimes to make the difference and understand that we're not talking about Islam as a faith, being genocidal against the Jews. We're talking about this regime using a sacred text to kind of justify and rationalize their call for genocide. But this is what they're calling for, and he said it very clearly. In no uncertain terms, we're talking about, he was basically telling me that he wanted to, for this end days prophecy, to bring it about, and that he felt he had a role to play within that story, and that Israel had to go, and that Jews had to go. And when I told him, when you say to go, are we talking murder here? And he was like, well, yes, but those are not acts of murder; they are religious duties. So they saw this as an act of worship, which is quite scary. It scared me because, again, going back to the 1930s, I think that Nazism was a political ideology. It was bad enough. This is different. This is utilizing and exploiting the divine to try to sell genocide and rationalize it. And there's something particularly perverse in that, because you're trying to bring a faith, and again, the divine, which is supposed to elevate, and reducing it to something that is nefarious and insidious and morbid. And it's just, my blood froze that day. And it's just the determination in his eyes is I've met a few people with those eyes, and I hope I never do again. But no, that wasn't fun. And I just, again, I've been trying for quite some time now to warn people about it. And I know it's very difficult for people to comprehend or even to believe me, because, they're thinking, well, she's crazy. Of course, they don't mean, when they say death to Israel, they don't mean death to the Jews. Yes, they do. Because when they say death to Israel, we're not talking about Israel as a country. We're talking about Israel, Jacob. So yes, the Jews. This is us that he's talking about. And not in a nice way. He's not talking about, relocating somewhere. No, he's talking about getting rid of us completely. And they have a plan, and they have contingency plans, and there's a whole range of things that they want to do and are doing, yes. Which is a problem.
You did say that there was a plan to actually assassinate Jewish leaders in the diaspora.
I did. And again, initially, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to blame anyone at all, but the first time that I kind of revealed that, because I kind of sat on it for a few years, because I was waiting for the right time, because I've learned, if I've learned anything, is that sometimes knowledge is power, but you need to know you need to learn when to use it, because otherwise it's just going to fall flat and nobody's going to pay attention. So I was waiting, because I knew of the plan, and so I knew what kind of what crumbs and information to look for to understand that this plan was being put in action. So when I started to notice that things were not quite right, things were happening and people thought they were quite disjointed and had nothing to do with one another, I knew that no, actually there was a plan, and this plan was being again put in action. So I reached out to a few people to try to kind of raise the alarm, and initially they didn't believe me, because thinking, well, she's crazy, she doesn't know what she's talking about, you being dramatic. Of course not, it can't be that bad. And it took me about, I would say, a good 2 years for people to pay attention. And finally, I mean, there was an article in the Jewish Chronicle, and I'm very grateful for David Rose for doing so. He did an amazing job. And I think literally less than a week after the article was published, our Minister for Security came out and actually, admitted that yes, they did know. They did know about the plan. They did know that the Islamic Republic had mapped out the Jewish community, that they did know that there was, a target on several people, and that they were taking the threat seriously, because it was materializing and becoming even more real than they thought before. So I was happy to be vindicated. My problem is that, again, I feel that it has kind of fallen flat, because even though the threat is real, and our Minister of Security came out and said so. So we're not talking about, leaks or anonymous sources. We're talking about, a state official coming out and saying that, yes, the Islamic Republic is actually, fomenting murder against not just British citizens, but the Jewish community in particular. So we're being targeted. And it's not just in the UK. it's the diaspora. Nothing is being done in terms of what does it mean in terms of our relationship with Iran? What does it mean in terms of, the Jewish diaspora in particular? Are we being protected? Are we even doing something to protect ourselves, or to have a discussion with each other, and in our schools and our businesses and our synagogues, everything, our way of life, a tradition? I mean, we've gone through something similar before. That can't happen again. We can't be threatened like this again. And I feel that the media for about a week or so, talked about it. The Independent picked it up, a few media, but again, it was very superficial. It was, sound bites here and there, but then nothing. Mm-hmm. So I feel a little bit disheartened, if I'm honest with you, because I feel that a lot more could have been done. I think that we could do a lot more in terms of raising our voices and demanding accountability on the part of our, state officials, so that they could do something. They should do something. They have a duty of care. And also, for the world to understand that the Islamic Republic cannot allow to not only speak like this, but even, the simple fact that the Islamic Republic is advocating genocide is bad enough. The fact that they're planning for it and not being challenged, and for people to not qualify this as a crime against humanity, and I don't really care if they haven't done it yet, is the fact that they're planning it that troubles me, and the fact that we have an opportunity to stop it before innocent blood is shed. Because I think that once blood is shed, it's too late. We failed, because nobody deserves to be sacrificed to the altar of the Islamic Republic in order for the government to say, well, yes, there is a problem, let's do something about it. I don't want people to die. So here we are, and I don't know is really what I have right now is I don't know what's going to happen, because I tried, but I don't think that people are really kind of appreciating the size of the problem, unfortunately.
It's been about 6 months since the protests first erupted in Iran with the death of Mahsa Amini. What is your assessment of the situation now?
I'd like to call it a revolution, because I think it is. I think that, first of all, I'd like to pay tribute to number one, Iranian women, but Iranians on the whole. I think what they're doing in terms of the resistance, against the regime, and we need to remember that they're the first people to suffer under the regime, and they have done so for 43 years. It's too many decades. Is incredible. Their courage is unparalleled, because again, when people come out in the street and put themselves out there, it's not just their life that they actually putting in jeopardy, but that of their family. And the regime has proven to be brutal, and they stop at nothing. They have killed children, they have poisoned schoolgirls, they have raped women, sexually abused thousands, committed atrocities that I don't even want to talk about. They will most likely commit more unless they're stopped. So for Iranians to go without weapons, they don't have anything. To still stand up and day after day go and face that monstrosity that is the regime, for me is a lesson in it's a lesson in humility and bravery, and I'm incredibly grateful to the Iranian people to do that, to be the carrier of that kind of courage, so that hopefully this kind of theo-fascism would fall and forever rest. But yes, I think ultimately, look, we're not really helping them, are we? The international community has kind of fallen asleep at the wheel. That said, I do believe that it will win, because it's in the nature of things. We have a saying in France, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, which is basically the voice of the people is the voice of God, meaning that the wishes of the people is the source of true power. And so there's no way that the regime will carry on. They might carry on for like maybe 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years. Eventually they will go. The problem is that we're running against the clock in terms of what the regime is pursuing, which is obviously nuclear power. So that is a problem. But in terms of what the Iranians are doing, they're doing the right thing. I think they want the right thing for themselves, which is secularism, democracy, human rights. They aspire to go back to a time where they actually had a choice. We talk a lot about the Shah, 1979. a lot of it has been rewritten by the regime. So a lot of our assumptions, or at least the people's assumption of what the Shah was and the kind of government and institution that he was running is actually not accurate. It wasn't as bad as the regime obviously likes to make it out. Yes, abuses were committed, but that happens, unfortunately. But I think that Iran back then was on its way to become a thriving secular democracy, but obviously reforms were interrupted by the Islamic Revolution, so we would never know. Is what I say. But I don't like to, I think it's pointless to kind of have that discussion about, but the Shah was, he did this, we did that. Well, we don't know, because again, history has been rewritten by the Islamic Republic. So can we really tell? Not really. So I think it's better to just say nothing. But I think that everyone would agree that the Shah was definitely less of a tyrant than
what we have now.
The Ayatollah. That's for sure. So yeah, I think that Iranians would much rather live under the Shah right now than the Ayatollah, because at least then they had rights and they were protected. But anyway, so yes, I think they will win ultimately, and I wish them well. I really do. My concern is, what does it mean for Israel today? And the problem is, with 82 or 83% enriched uranium, the clock is running. And I'm worried, because again, I don't think that people are grasping what that means. We're still talking about, the JCPOA, which is a beautiful sentiment. If it was anyone else, to engage in diplomacy and any form of international agreement demands that, you actually sitting across a willing actor and a party willing to actually conceptualize the notion of peace. I don't think that the Islamic Republic is capable of that. And therefore, I think that any form of diplomacy is doomed to fail. And I'm not passing judgment on Iranians or Iran. I'm just saying that the regime right now, as of today, in the way that is being formulated and the kind of policy that it's, projecting out onto the world, is not fit to sit at the table with anybody.
Yeah, and people have underestimated the ideological background to this, haven't they?
Greatly.
Yeah.
I mean, look, they literally, shoot their own people.
Yeah.
In the streets, quite happily.
And they're willing
they justify it quite happily.
They're willing to pay any price in order to achieve their objectives.
But that's the thing. But here's the worst part, is that they actually told us that. We haven't listened. There's a very famous, and that was quoted to me twice, once by President Raisi and another time by Khamenei, where they were telling me, they repeated what Khamenei said once when his generals came to him saying that, Iraqis were bombing them, that they were going to destroy Tehran. You have to agree to a peace deal, because we're going to lose and Iran will burn and people will die. And he literally said, I don't care. I don't care to see this country burn and everyone in it, as long as God claims victory, as long as I claim victory. They don't care. They don't have this whole concept that we have, that we want to protect human life at all costs, which isn't, it's a normal, natural, I would say, human sentiment. I think that everyone has it, but they don't, because they don't value life. They don't see people as human beings with souls. They see people as tools to rule over. So you are nothing for them. So that, for them, civilian lives, it just mean absolutely nothing. They don't, I mean, for them, it's just, if you would pick a flower from fields, you don't think about it. That's how they view people. And so they assign no value to life. And actually, I would argue that to some degree, they actually worship death, because this whole notion of martyrdom, that you can only be elevated once, you're dead. Not sure that will help you, but this is part of the ideology that they're selling to people, this negation of actually life, and it's dangerous. And a lot of people obviously in Iran are rejecting it. They're not abiding by this, by this idea, but they've been locked into it. They've been hijacked. And so everything that, when Iranians are telling you, they understand that the regime is willing to do anything at all to make sure that this revolution fails, that they're willing to murder and commit atrocities, in order to retain power. They will. They're not, we need to listen to Iranians. They know exactly what they're talking about. 43 years under this regime, they have seen everything. They know exactly how far the regime is willing to go, which is to the very bitter end. And I don't think that we can comprehend that kind of evil, because we would never do this.
Mhm.
You know, everyone, I mean, we have rules even in war. So we can't comprehend that kind of, you know, this willingness to negate life and even people's existence or right to exist, which is even worse. And so I think this is where, you know, there's a block here. It's because we can't possibly understand how far they're willing to go, because we would never do that. But we need to stop thinking and projecting our wants and wishes and aspirations onto the Islamic Republic, imagining that that's what they want for themselves, because that's not true.
Absolutely chilling. Well, we've had a couple of comments to say that you're a very brave woman, amazing woman, and, you know, absolutely incredible. So I'll just sort of read out a couple of questions. You don't have to answer them if they're too personal, Catherine.
Well, I'll decide. I mean, look, I can always say no.
You decide, because there's a question of when you were married to your husband, did you have to sever ties with your Jewish family? And another question about your children. What are the relations with your children? I'll leave that to you to decide.
I would say first part, yes, I had to. The second part, my kids are and we said that my children are my children in all sense of the word. Yes. And that there's no relationship whatsoever with their dad. So, which is a shame. And I'm not pleased with it for their sake. But at the same time, I think it was for the best. And they have me.
Yeah,
I'm a whole lot of people. So, look, they're healthy, they're happy. We have a very kind of we talk a lot, so it's not like we don't run away from, you know, hard conversations, and they understand it. They respect my choice, and they're glad that I made it. So happy kids.
Amazing. Yeah, and then Jonathan asked what language was used for this conversation, presumably when you were speaking to Ayatollah Khamenei.
Oh, I don't speak Arabic. I'm going to clear something up, because everybody was saying she speaks Farsi, she speaks, I don't know. I mean, 3 words, okay, so very bad spy. I know a few. I know a few words that I would not repeat, but anyways, because those are the things that you learn, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I speak literally 3 words of Farsi. So obviously every time there was a translator, and you know, Raisi doesn't speak a word of English. Khamenei doesn't speak a word of English. He speaks some Arabic badly, and I think Turkish, and obviously Farsi. So, you know, we had a translator. He spoke in Farsi. They translated. I answered in English. But to be honest with you, I didn't do much of the talking. So.
Yeah, and so do you really view the Islam that they're practicing now as a sort of perversion of true Islam?
See, this is a difficult conversation, because obviously if you take this out of context, people will say, well, you know, this is Islamophobic, you know, Islam has nothing to do with them and with it. And I agree, but their version, their interpretation, they have hijacked it. And they're selling this as, you know, it's actually, look, I don't even like to call it Shia Islam, it's Khomenism. That's what I like to call it, because that's the best way to describe it. It has nothing to do with, you know, the Quran, their book, because I don't want to be disrespectful to, you know, to an entire faith and an entire people. But they have turned it into something that is quite scary. And this is a cult. It's a cult. You know, it's a cult of the personality. But because they put, you know, this tag and labeled it Islam, it's almost impossible for people to kind of address it, because automatically you being labeled an Islamophobe, or, you know, you being this, you being that, you being sectarian, and some people don't talk about it. But I think it's important that we talk about it, and also remember that a lot of you know, Muslim communities suffer because of that cult. They're actually the first target often. So.
What do you think are the roots of this cult? Do you think they're sort of quite recent? They're modern? Do you think these people were influenced by Nazism in any way, or the Muslim Brotherhood?
See, that's I know where you're going with this. I think it's a little bit the other way around. I think they recognized look, there was always, anti-Semitism is a running theme in the Islamic world. We know this to be true. I'm not passing judgment on today. I'm talking about history here. Talking about today is the subject, but it has been a theme. And so I think that they recognized in Nazi Germany's attempt, to normalize anti-Semitism as, the rule, something that they could kind of latch on, and a way to build a bridge with the West. You have to remember that the region was still under colonialism, and so they were trying to kind of come from under it. And an alliance with Nazi Germany at the time was, why not? I think for them it was a mean to survive, and also to kind of, translate their own ideology in the West. Because remember that, Khomeini from the get-go didn't want to limit his experiment to the borders of Iran. It was always geared towards export. So it makes sense, for them to want to kind of, to find outposts, or at least to find pockets, within the West, so that they could kind of infiltrate and find friends and build ties there, so that they could kind of expand, and then convert them to their own views. And they've been doing it quite successfully, even though Nazi Germany did fall. I think that they've enjoyed, and they managed to kind of morph that way. So they moved a lot, and they kind of changed direction, and they always have new faces. That you have a million iterations of the Islamic Republic, which is why it's so frustrating, because when you try to point them out to people, they're like, oh, but no, because this organization is doing this. And I'm like, yes, can you please listen to what it is that they're saying? It's just another iteration of what the Islamic Republic is saying, except that it's maybe less violent and it's a bit more, covert, but it's still there. The language is the same when you go to the end of the argument, but people never do that. Number one, it takes too much effort. And number two, that would force them to have to do something about it. And I don't think that they want to.
Right. And one more question, which is, do you feel unsafe? Do you feel threatened? I mean, are you on this list that they have of, Jews in the diaspora that they want to kill?
Look, we're all on a list. So, whether you higher on, you on top, in the middle, I mean, does it really matter? I mean, the alternative would be to stay quiet. And I wasn't born to do that. So no.
Right.
So it's not about courage. It's not about nothing. It's just, look, we could, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, I could die a very stupid death and, and not have done anything. If you stumble across something that could actually save lives and, potentially, save us, would you turn away? I can't. So I'm just going to see that through, and don't know.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, Catherine. I think we could go on forever.
I think there's a French lady in the audience. I'm going to say hey.
Yeah, there are a few French ladies, I think. Yeah. Just anything else? No, I think we
have one racist comment in the comments, and I'm going to take that person out of the meeting.
Oh dear,
I'm
dear.
remove that person.
Oh gosh. Anyway, I think it's been absolutely fascinating, Catherine. I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your memories, and for being such a brave woman. Because I think we all agree that it's absolutely amazing that you were in the lion's den, talking to the supreme leader and the president, and who on earth would have done this, but someone as brave as you.
I'm just glad that a Jew did it, because I think it just taught them a bit of a lesson. So I'm just glad that there's an irony somewhere. It's probably lost on them. But...
Yeah. And they must feel so terrible about having let you in there.
I think they're just angry. But it's just well, look, it happens. I mean, they'll get over it. I mean, there's a lot of other people who are doing, much more useful things than I could ever do in that space. But I think it was yeah, I think it was a bit of a wink to them, saying, "Oh well, you know, you don't like us, but we can still manage a thing or two."
Fantastic. Well, no, we'd like to thank you, you know, on all our behalves for what you're doing, and we wish you all the best. You know, in your journalistic career, in your career as a political analyst, and it's all very, very valuable. And you know, we hope for the best, and we hope for the people of Iran. We hope that, you know, the
I
best.
hope so. I hope so. Once upon a time, you know, Israel and Iran were great friends. So I hope we could go back to this, and I hope that, you know, two communities could just kind of forget 43 years and kind of, you know, start fresh. And rebuild.
Hopefully it'll just be a blip.
Yeah, I'm sure. Look, in 10 years we'll look back and then we'll be like, oh well, you know, it all turned out well in the end. So I'm sure it will happen. You know, we have to remain positive. So
absolutely. So thank you again, and thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a most stimulating conversation. Thank you.
Okay, should we open up for everyone?
So yeah, so I think we'll stop the recording and go on to the commercial break. So we have quite a busy program ahead. We have a program about how different communities celebrate Seder night. So we've got a Yemenite, a Karaite, and a Syrian on the 28th of March.
Give me a second, darling. You're going too fast.
Sorry,
too fast.
She's going too fast.
Right.
Okay, here are the advertisements. And I haven't forgotten, Sandra, there is a special event with Henry Dalal, who was the royal photographer, actually born in Iran. And he's going to talk about his experience of photographing the British royal family and the late Queen. And that's, I think, on the 2nd of April, which is actually a Sunday. And this is a joint event with the Sephardi synagogue in Montreal. And we've got something going on in April and in May, something special to coincide with Lag BaOmer. So if anyone wants to say anything off the record.
Right, let me stop the recordings. Hold on.
We'll just stop that now.